What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm coming at you with an updated best deck tier list for post Cyberstorm Access, which sneak peek is this weekend, I'm pretty sure, for most people. And yeah, Cyberstorm Access is right around the corners, and that's sort of what I've been wanting to talk about this week and probably next week as well, is just how the format is changing post Cyberstorm Access and how we should probably best prepare for the new set, because it does bring a lot of changes. However, I am going to mention that this tier list is going to be affected by what we assume to be the upcoming ban list, which could release next week, 2 weeks from now. It could never release, you know, we never really know with these things. But yeah, there's a chance a ban list will alter this list, and depending on how much it actually does, I'll redo this tier list when the time comes. However, this is going to be based on no ban list, and then I'll mention things about potentially what a ban list could do. So before we hop into it, I do want to let you guys know, Discord link down below along with all of our other social media links. Also, I'm trying to hit 15,000 subscribers, so if you do enjoy this Yu-Gi-Oh content and you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. And without further ado, let's start ranking some decks. We have Tier 1, which are going to be the top contenders next format, things we really expect to do well based on, you know, Cyac testing, along with previous testing from our previous tournaments, especially considering no ban list. Tier 2, which are decks that are right under Tier 1 and are still really powerful, can top regionals, can top YCSs potentially as well. Rogue are decks that are a little weaker than those. They fall into like the category of decks that are really good at locals, probably good at the regional scene, but might struggle at YCSs and such, but still can top. Don't get me wrong, any rogue deck can end up topping a YCS usually. Almost rogue, which are decks that are just not quite at that level. They need support or they need something off the list. They're just not that good. And then we have Ain't It, which is, you know, decks that just ain't it. Going through the list here, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about decks that haven't seen the limelight in a while or really need some sort of boost. So for example, ABC Therion, it's not terrible, but it's not super great right now, and yeah, especially going into a Droll and Ogre format, it's not going to be that good. Also, I should mention, if you want to see sort of like what hand traps I think will be good, next format, I have a hand trap tier list on this channel as well if you want to check it out. And some of these decks are going to find placements based on cards that might be popular going into next format, like Droll and Ghost Ogre. Phantom Knights, I'm also going to probably put in Almost Rogue. They just haven't done anything in a long time, and they're fine, but as long as Kashtira especially is a deck, I think it's really hard to play Phantom Knights. Burning Abyss, we're putting in Ain't It, because Konami will not give them 3 Beatrice. I really want Burning Abyss to have 3 Beatrice again, but without the Beatrice and with Arise Heart still running around, it's not that great. Pendulum is interesting because I feel like this deck should be Rogue or Tier 2. I think Pendulum is such a good deck, but because of Kashtira being able to hit both Pendulum zones, even if Diablosis is banned, they can still lock 2. So Pendulum will still suffer to Kashtira even if they get hit. So I don't know, I'm going to put Pendulum in maybe like Rogue, I don't even know, maybe Almost Rogue. I feel like their Kashtira matchup is awful, but I feel like they should be up here power level wise. Plunder Patrol, I'm going to put in Rogue. I think this deck is still strong. It has definitely been trending downwards though. Like, it didn't do as well at the YCS, the 250th YCS, as I thought it would, and it's been trending downward recently as well as far as play rate, it seems. I still think it's strong. Maybe you can argue it for Tier 2, but I do think it's going to be just a really strong, like, Rogue deck. Border Stun, it's going in the Almost Rogue category. Like, this deck is literally the definition of, like, a Locals Legend deck, where oftentimes you'll see, like, stun players at Locals and things like that, and they tend to do well. I mean, Border's a crazy card, so we're going to put it in Almost Rogue. Crystal Beast, Ain't It. You really need a format where its floodgates are very good. Like, in tier format, this deck was like almost playable just because it could play so many floodgates, but I think the Crystal Beast engine just needs more. Cyber Dragon, I'm also gonna put in Ain't It. It struggles versus decks it shouldn't even struggle versus. Like, if Kashtira Arise Heart pass, like, you would think Cyber Dragon would be good versus that, but because there's a macro on field, it just isn't. Yeah, Cyber Dragon just ain't it. Heroes, I'm gonna put in Rogue. I think this deck is just always solid enough. It's been good from quite a few regionals I've seen. It definitely is a deck that can compete. I think Dark Law gets a lot better going into next format, especially. Like, Dark Law gets so much better. Because, I mean, for the same reasons Arise Heart has been good, a Macrocosmos effect is just great, and it's even better looking into next format. DDD, I'll put in almost rogue. I think this deck is solid, but like there's better decks to play in this combo category, where DDD is like fine, but I think it could be better. I'm wondering if how I'm doing this is right. Maybe some of these decks should go up to rogue, and these rogue decks should go to tier 2. We'll sort of see as I go through the tier list how I want to change some of these maybe, because it looks like it's going to be trending downwards on this list. We'll have to see as I get further along. Branded, I'm going to put in, it's either tier 2 or tier 1. The thing is, in the TCG, it kind of feels like it's been around here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to make this like tier 1.5, tier 2, and then rogue. So we're changing the tiers mid-tier list. I feel like this is a little better because branded really needs to go in something like this, because I don't think it's a tier 2 deck, but it hasn't proven itself to be a tier 1 deck. Now it is getting support. Quem is a crazy card, but is it going to put branded in tier 1? My thing is, as good as Quem is, and like the fact that they get Incandescent Dragon, which is pretty solid, and they have a couple of new support cards, it still has the same problems with Ash and D-Barrier, which is what's really hindering this deck. Now, maybe the support will put it up here, and maybe the play rate will go up because it got support, but I'm not sure it's going to be like a top contender despite the support it's gotten. But I do think it's a very strong deck and almost tier 1. Dinomorphia, I'm going to put this in tier 2. Now, hear me out on this. I know, like, if you've watched my channel for a while, you know I'm very biased towards Dinomorphia. It's a favorite deck of mine because I did pilot it to a second place finish at a regional not so long ago. Or I guess it's been a while now, almost a year. But yeah, Dinomorphia gets support in Cyberstorm Access, which is a new counter trap, and that card is insane. And I think if people want to pick up Dinomorphia, it's very good. Now, it does have a couple of issues in the format, being if Kashtira is not hit, a Rise Heart is very good versus this deck. And also, the Pearly matchup is a little scary as well, because if they go first and set up a Noir with like 4 bounces, right, then all your back row can get bounced at end phase, and that seems rough. But you could play like Go Second cards for that deck, and then this deck I think will destroy Super Heavy Samurai. In my opinion, it looks like it will just obliterate that deck beyond belief, because if you stick Rex, their whole deck probably crumbles with no out. So I think this card could be insane. If there is an out that I'm not really thinking of, feel free to leave that down below, but normally the outs to Rexstrom, besides like a Kaiju, obviously a Kaiju will out him, but normally the outs to Rexstroms are like spells and trap cards, which Super Heavy Samurai can't run. And with the new counter trap, you can more reliably get Rexstrom on field, which is going to be insane. So I'm going to tentatively put this in tier 2. Regular Dinosaur, I'm going to put in Rogue, which normally these are in the same tier because it feels weird to put one lower than the other because they're both like the dinosaur decks. After Wild Survivors, when the dinosaur support comes out, and I think there's another set we get dino support in, I'm not 100% sure, but then this deck can definitely come up to 1.5 or tier 2. But for now, I'm going to put it in Rogue. Dragon Maid, I'll put in Rogue. I think, like, depending on how Cyac goes, it's either Ain't It or Rogue. Bestial control stuff is definitely getting better, I think. And now there's ways to, like, use Chamber and a Bestial to make Chaos Angel, which will be good. And Bestial control with like Dragon Maid as an engine could be fine. So I'm gonna put it in Rogue. And Seal's Pass is still very strong. So Dragoon stuff, usually it's in Rogue. This card is obviously crazy, but it hasn't done anything amazing. And this is like for Dark Magician or also decks that want to run Dragoon in it, like Guru or even Labyrinth to an extent, although Labyrinth is a little better than just a Dragoon deck. But yeah, they're usually pretty solid and can definitely stomp at locals. Eldritch I'll also put in Rogue. Bestials are possibly going to trend upwards because of like the new support. Like even a Bestial Synchro Dragon Link thing is possible. And Eldritch will really suffer from that. And Light and Dark decks in general will suffer a bit. So Eldritch, I think it had actually been trending ever so slightly upwards. I saw it with a couple regional tops, but definitely going to put it in Rogue. Flunder, I think I want to put in tier 1.5. Is that weird? Maybe it's just like the top of tier 2. Here's the thing about Flunder. I think the engine is insane when it plays, and even though it's weaker after Barrier Statue's banned from last list, D-Shifter looks insane next format. And I do think there are decks that are going to thrive just off being Dimensional Shifter decks. Of course, this is also going to depend a little bit on how Kashtira gets hit on the list, if it does get hit. But Flunder, I don't think have a terrible Kashtira matchup anyways from what I've seen, so I don't know. I think Fluandereeze is going to be a strong contender, so this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think this deck is very strong. Exo Sister, I'm going to put it in Rogue. It does get support. I'm just going to put it here so it's like the most recent deck we're talking about. I think Exo Sister, its support it gets is in the form of Sakitama, a new ritual from the new set that essentially allows you to get multiple rank 4s easier, and that's really good for Exo Sister. Another thing is Aratama and Sakitama normal summon, and they don't special summon, which works with Martha very well, and it's a lot of extra power for Exo Sister. That being said, I think still I would put this deck in tier 2 or higher if it was in a format where the deck was good. That being said, it could be at like the top of Rogue. I think the support for this deck is really solid. I'm tempted to put it in tier 2, but yeah, I'm gonna put it in Rogue for now until I think Aratama or Sakitama impress me more. I'm tempted to try it out, especially with the new support, and I'm very tempted to put it in tier 2, but I'm gonna put it in Rogue. Drytron, probably in Rogue. Again, same thing with Eldritch, like the Bestial stuff is really strong, and I think Drytron might find itself here next list, especially with it being a Droll format, so yeah, that's pretty tough. Altergeist, I'm gonna put in Rogue. When it gets its support, it will be crazy, but that's in Duelist Nexus, not Cyberstorm Access. Kashtira, I'm still gonna put in tier 1. Now, depending on how this deck is hit on the ban list, will heavily affect where Kashtira is placed. If we go into Cyberstorm Access with 0 Kashtira hits, I think the deck is still a very strong, super strong deck. Yeah, I'm gonna place Kashtira in tier 1. Grenmaju, I'm gonna put it in Rogue. Like all the Ghost Second strategies are usually somewhat competent, so I'll put it in Rogue. Harpies, I'll put in Ain't It. We're going into a Droll format, which kind of can hurt this deck. We're going into like a format where macro is still existing, so sometimes I'd consider the new Harpy variants to be in Rogue, but I'm gonna put it in Ain't It. Earth Machine's pretty solid Rogue. I mean, technically it's gotten support through quite a few things. I believe also the new Infinitrack comes out, so I'll leave this in Rogue. Rescue Ace, right now I'm going to put it in Ain't It. It just hasn't impressed me one bit, even to call it Rogue. After Duelist Nexus, I do think this deck goes up a couple tiers, maybe. But I'm going to leave this in Rogue. Maybe Rogue. Okay. Adagnister, we're going into a format where Kaijus are very good. I think playing pure Adagnister is definitely not the way to go. Mathmech Adagnister is a little different, but ending with the Arrival makes almost no sense right now when we're going into a format based around Kaijus. So yeah, that's a little tough. Alistair stuff ain't it, hasn't been it for a while. Spellbook stuff I'll put in Rogue. I still think this is underexplored, and maybe on the next list we might get more judgments back and this deck will be okay, but I do think I'll put it in Ain't It because we are going into a Droll format and macros in the format, which is kind of tough for this deck. So Tri-Brigade and Tri-Brigade Sprite, definitely a weird spot, because again, this will change very heavily based on how Sprite is hit on a list. However, Tri-Brigade Sprite specifically, not like pure Tri-Brigade, but Tri-Brigade Sprite, even Bird Up to an extent, I think they're okay, so I'm going to put them in tier 2. Obviously, Tri-Brigade Sprite has done pretty well, especially at the last 250th YCS, so it's a pretty strong deck, and I'm willing to put it in tier 2. Prank Kids, Lamau, we're putting that in Ain't It. Where It May Rest in Peace Forever, don't bring Meow back, please. Infernity, also Ain't It. Even if this deck is unlocked, I'm not sure if it's going to be that great ever since the Bestial is released, so Infernity's in a tough spot. Labyrinth, I'm willing to put in 1.5. I actually think this deck gets a lot better post Cyberstorm Access because of Chaos Angel, which is actually something it can make if you decide to run the furniture, which I think is very cool. And I think as we've explored more with this deck and people have tried the furniture version more, which is a version I love so much more because it feels so much closer to what we played it as originally. Before it was like just mega floodgate stuff with skill drain and Gozens, and it became disgusting. With furniture, I think this deck is very cool, and I think it's pretty strong. Now, back row decks are in a weird spot, I think because of Noir, but I don't think I'm willing to write them off yet, so I'm putting it in tier 1.5. Madolche, Rogue, it's a solid engine, but it doesn't have any favorable matchups really going into next format. Paleo tier, I'll put in Rogue. It's actually not completely terrible, but it's not good either, so I'm gonna put it in Rogue. Mathmech, I'm putting in tier 1. Not only does this deck get support in Cyberstorm Access in the form of the firewall support, and now they have a couple of more like different options they can end board with, a few more like extenders in a way. Like they can go for the new Link 6 potentially, they can go for the Cynet counter trap now. They have a couple more lines, so But not only that, I think Mathmech is actually one of the most broken decks this format. Broken is a strong word because it's a fair, like, Cyburst deck, but it's really not. I think this deck is disgusting. I hate it. Yeah, I'm willing to put it in tier 1 going into next format. I think a lot of people are still going to be on Mathmech, and I think it's been trending up for a while now, so I'm going to put this here. You could argue it to be in 1.5, but I think Mathmech is just disgusting. Mikanko stuff, I'm going to put in Rogue, maybe even Ain't It, because this is a ritual-based deck where Droll is definitely a problem for it, so yeah, I'm a little worried for Mikanko stuff. Ninja, I'll put in Rogue. It's not terrible, but it's not amazing. Naturia is another deck that I think is really dependent on the next list, but I'm going to put it in 1.5. I know maybe it's still tier 1 if it goes unhit, right? Like maybe it's still a tier 1 deck in the next format. But like Super Heavy Samurai is going for Exterio stuff. Hurley I don't think is super worried about Runic cards either. That being said, I think it is still a tier 1 deck. I think Naturia Runic has proven itself as like maybe the 3rd best deck of this current format. It's definitely up there to talk about. We'll put it here. Pearly, I think we're all, to no surprise, going to call this tier 1. For the last couple of weeks, people have been talking about almost nothing but Pearly and Super Heavy Samurai, and through Cyac testing and just seeing what's good after Cyberstorm Access, Pearly looks great. It's definitely a deck that will consider it tier 1.5. After Duelist Nexus, I think it's maybe even better than that, but yeah, I think it's going to be a strong deck, maybe not the best. Again, it depends on the ban list. If all these decks get weaker, then Pearly will be a top contender for sure. But yeah, I'm willing to put it in tier 1. We can also go ahead and talk about Super Heavy Samurai. Super Heavy Samurai, I think, is the deck most people are afraid of. It has a couple of different options. It has 2 different FTKs, one that actually burns your life points down to 0, and then another that hand loops you. And even though those exist, they're not always the version people are even playing because the deck just sets up an FTK with its end board off a 1-card combo. Now, the deck does have some weaknesses in the fact that it can't really play spells and traps. It's super weak to Dark Ruler no more, but it's a deck with FTKs with a strong 1-card starter like engine that can play a lot of Go Second cards. It's weak to Droll, but yeah, I think it's obviously a tier 1 contender, and it's what people have been talking about a lot. Now, we'll see how the format develops. Maybe it won't end up being, especially if all 3 of these decks are still amazing. But yeah, we'll just have to see. Sky Striker, I'm gonna put in Rogue. It's like solid enough. Rika, I'm gonna put in tier 2. This deck is pretty strong. Like, I feel like people always underestimate this deck. Potentially, I'm even underestimating it, putting it here. But yeah, I think maybe 1.5 or tier 2. I think Rika is such a good deck. It's one of my favorites. And yeah, I think people probably just sleep on this deck too hard. Maybe again, I could be sleeping on it and it's a tier 1.5 deck, but I'll put it in tier 2. Emancipator, gonna put it in Rogue. Like, there is a bunch of Earthbox stuff that can go on with like Cyberstorm Access and with Vernia Sylphs and Super Heavy Samurai. I don't really think that will be a thing for us. Block Dragon's not back, thank goodness, so yeah. Runic Stun, we'll put in Rogue. It's fine. Salamangrate, I think also is Rogue. There's just better Cyburst decks right now. Like a bunch of better Cyburst decks, like namely Mathmech and even Marincess, so I'll put Salad in Rogue. Bee Trooper, I'll put in Rogue. I'm not going to say anything too advanced on this deck, but I do think this deck has some nifty things going into the next format. That's kind of all I'll say on it. I think it has matchups post Cyberstorm Access that are pretty okay for it, and depending on how these 3 decks get hit, Bee Trooper might be okay, or at least better than it's been in the past. Shark, I'm also going to put in Rogue. Weather Painter, Rogue. Sprite is a big one to talk about. I think Sprite is still like a tier 1 contender. After the ban, or before the ban list, I think Sprite is one of the top decks right now. But can we really have all these decks in tier 1? That's a lot of decks, right? This is one reason why the ban list would be so helpful to have, because look how many tier 1 decks I have on here. Like, it's a lot of tier 1 decks. Maybe these need to get hit so they can sell the Cyberstorm Access stuff, right? Just a thought. But yeah, Sprite, probably a tier 1 contender as well. Maybe 1.5, but I think Sprite's very good. Yeah, I'll leave it in tier 1. Sword Soul, probably still tier 2. Maybe you can consider it Rogue, but I think Sword Soul is a strong engine that can play enough flex spots, and it's not really weak to Droll, so that's something good going for it in the next format. I think Sword Soul's fine. Tier Laments, I'll also put in tier 2. I think this deck has also been slept on very heavily. Is it amazing? No, but I think it's better than a lot of these decks in Rogue. So yeah, I'm willing to put it here. Dragons, I'll put in tier 2. I think with the bestial stuff, it's a lot better than it has been. A lot of people love playing Dragon Link. I think the engine's pretty solid. I'm gonna put it in tier 2. Maybe with the new bestial stuff, it's even tier 1.5. I know dragons are definitely gonna be played, but to what extent, I'm unsure. And it sort of depends on how these decks go, but I'm gonna put it in tier 2 for now. Trap Tricks, I'm gonna put in tier 2. I think it's fine. Less good than Labyrinth still in my opinion, but it's an okay deck. Yeah, I have nothing bad to say about Trap Tricks, so I'll put it in tier 2. Marincess I'll also place in tier 2. It's a strong Cyburst deck, but definitely less good than Math Mech, so I think this is a comfortable spot for Marincess. It's better than Salad, so tier 2 kind of makes sense. Agents, ain't it? Although, I'm going to put it in Rogue, actually, because it gets Apple Dragon, which is a very good card coming out for Agents next set, or this upcoming set. Technically, it's also a Sprite card. There's actually a few things that Apple Dragon will be able to do. But yeah, I'm going to put it in Rogue because it's getting some support, but we'll just have to see how that kind of pans out. Virtual World, I'm putting in Rogue. No big surprise there. It's not an Ain't It deck, but it's not... Actually, this deck does get a little better in the next format, but not so much where I'm willing to call it tier 2. Actually, hold up. This deck is not bad. Chuche is very good versus super heavy... Or not Chuche. Shen is very good into super heavy samurai. I don't know, maybe Virtual World is tier 2. Like, it could be better in the next format. I think it has good matchups, but I'm gonna leave it in Rogue because I'm just not sure. Gold Pride Punk stuff, I'm not 100% sure if I'd put this in 1.5 or 2. I've been testing with it a little bit. I've seen what it can do, and while I think power level wise it can do some crazy stuff and has good interruptions, it can go second pretty well. It's weak to Droll. It's very, very weak to Droll and Lockbird. It doesn't like some of the other things in the format as well. What do I think of Punk? Is it as good as these decks? I'll put it here. I think the deck gets enough flex spots and its engine is pretty strong. I'm going to put it here for now, but we'll see how that sort of pans out based on what else is being hit. Doom King, Baller Drock, some zombie stuff we'll put in Rogue. I'm going to put Generator in Rogue. Definitely this is going in Rogue. I'm forgetting its name even. Gishki. Haven't seen it do anything. I don't think it's as bad as Ain't It, but we'll put it in Rogue. Dark World, I'm willing to put in tier 2, even though I think it's a Droll and Lockbird format. If you don't open Droll and Lockbird or Dimension Shifter and you're playing like a D-Shifter deck like Kashtira or Birds, Dark World is still one of the strongest engines in the game, and it's a horrifying deck to play against. Very scary, very strong, and even when it does get drolled, it can set things like Skill Drain, which can be auto-win. So yeah, Dark World I'll put in tier 2. Springins I'll put in Rogue, and Scareclaw I'm also going to put in Rogue. And then Mana Dome is the last deck I want to talk about, which admittedly, I haven't seen too much of what the deck can do, but I do think that Mana Dome is nifty. I'll place it in tier 2 for now, just because I'm not 100% sure how strong it is, but I have seen some stuff, and it looks pretty okay, so I'll put it in tier 2 tentatively, but maybe that'll change as I discover more and that we get deeper into Cyac format. But yeah, with all that being said, this is going to wrap it up for me and this tier list. Leave your thoughts down below, what you think of the deck, or what you think of the deck. I'm doing a deck profile right now, apparently. What you think of the tier list, if I forgot a deck, or you think I didn't represent one that well based on like my own knowledge of it, or any other reason, feel free to leave those comments down below. I'll be sure to read them. But yeah, this has been Aaron with Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.